Maxey from outside. Sixers lead, courtesy of Tyrese Maxey.
Deep to left field, going back is Locastro. It is gone!
All right, what's up, everybody? This is your host, Ryan Coyle. Welcome back to the Beef Upfront podcast. Recording this today, 46 days away from the official kickoff of the college football season. We're starting to get excited, starting to get that itch for football. About a month and a half away now, so it's inching closer and closer every day. And over the next month and a half or so, even leading up to week one, I'm going to try and hit 25 to 30 of the biggest teams in college football headed into this season. Give you kind of a 10 to 15 minute breakdown, rundown on kind of what their season was like last year, what it's going to be like this upcoming season, my prediction for them, and give you kind of an in-depth breakdown of offense, defense, and everything in between. So today is the kickoff episode of that series college football primers for the 2024 season. This will be episode 1 here, and we're going to start in the state of Pennsylvania with the Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State last year, 10-3, lost in the Peach Bowl 38-25 to Ole Miss, but they also lost to Michigan and Ohio State. And if you don't know, if you're living under a rock, this is the first year that we are expanding from a 4-team college football playoff to the 12-team college football playoff. And 6 out of the last 8 playoffs, if it had made 12 teams, or if 12 teams would have qualified, Penn State would have qualified. So them and probably Ole Miss, I think, are the two schools that are kind of doing the backflips the most, where it's like for the past decade or so of the college football playoff, they've been good enough to kind of have a seat at the table, but not really get into the dance fully. They weren't able to make it there, make that next kind of push into that top 4. They are, however, though, able to get in this year. I mean, that is the expectation for Penn State. If they do not make the playoff this year, there are going to be some real storylines around the security of James Franklin's job, and curious to see if he would keep it if they don't make the playoffs, because this is a perfect kind of scenario for them. They're not in that upper echelon of those top 3 to 4 teams, but they are in kind of the next range between like 8 to 12, and maybe they can break through. Maybe they can finally be one of those top 3 to 4 teams, but this is the perfect scenario for a team like them, a team like Ole Miss. But as I said, last year, 10-3, did the typical Penn State thing where they won the games they should win. They lost the games against the better teams at the end of the day. I think last year was looked at more so as a springboard kind of year, hopefully building into this year, which this year I think that they're kind of expecting for their breakthrough to be, and it definitely helps with all that Michigan loss, along with Sharon Moore taking over for Jim Harbaugh. Moore did good in his 3 to 4 games as the head coach last year, but he's not the head coach that Jim Harbaugh is. They're definitely expected to take a step back. Ohio State is going into the season at number 1 or number 2 probably, so Penn State still going to have to get past them. Another big thing with the realignment this year in college football and in the college football playoff, no divisions in these power conferences. So Penn State doesn't even have Michigan on the schedule this year. But they have a star-studded junior class, one of the best recruiting classes in Penn State history. And that group is really being looked at to kind of be the group to get them over the top. And so that's why last year, a lot of those guys got a lot of experience as freshmen and sophomores. And now I think they were kind of hoping to beat at least one of Michigan or Ohio State last year, or even Ole Miss in the bowl game, to give the fan base some more confidence that they're going to be able to step through and make this big push. But that wasn't the case. They still won 10 games, but didn't win their bowl game and lost their 2 biggest regular season games there to Ohio State and Michigan. Obviously not bad losses, but Penn State fans expect to be able to beat them, and they just really haven't under James Franklin. The offense last year was ranked 12th in the country in points per game scoring at 36.2 points per game, but those numbers were definitely a little bit inflated, and I think James Franklin kind of knows that as well. He does run up the score a little bit on those type of things, but they scored 63 on Delaware, 63 on UMass, and 51 on Maryland. Then you look at their 2 biggest games of the regular season, they only scored 12 points against Ohio State and only 15 points against Michigan. So take that for what you will. He kind of ran up the score against some of these inferior squads and then really struggled, especially Drew Aller in the passing game. against the better opponents in Ohio State and Michigan last year. Explosive plays is where Penn State really struggled on the offensive end last year and where they really need to improve this year. Only 47 plays of 20-plus yards, which was 97th in the country out of 134 teams in the FBS. Defense was legit all year, though, for Penn State. They ranked third in points per game, first in rush defense, seventh in passing defense, and second in total defense. Turnover margin was elite, too, second in the country at plus 16. So last year, most teams, most schools are signing up and doing backflips and cartwheels for a 10-3 year. Sure, it would have been nice to win the bowl game, finish 11-2, but that really just isn't the reality at Penn State. They're kind of sick of being, the third fiddle there in the Big Ten, at least for these past few years, but behind Ohio State and Michigan. This year, they are really expecting and hoping for that kind of eventual breakthrough, maybe make it back to the Big Ten title game. But definitely the playoffs is the expectation for him. When you look at the head coach for this Penn State squad, James Franklin, 10 years now at Penn State already, hard to believe, but 88-39, a really good, solid record there. Does a really good job at recruiting, but hasn't been able to knock off these top teams. James Franklin at Penn State only holds a 4-16 record versus Ohio State and Michigan. That's just not really getting it done in the fan base's eyes. Is he able to kind of right the ship this year, win the Big Ten, make the playoff? Sure, then they're going to be doing some backflips. But this is a team that fails to beat Ohio State in the regular season game, doesn't make it to a Big Ten title, doesn't make it to the college football playoff. There should be some real scrutiny around his job. He does a really good job of keeping this program afloat and steady and recruits really well, but eventually you got to break through or there's going to be some changes. But Penn State, out of any team in the country, I think, is doing the backflips and cartwheels the most of this 12-team playoff. Like I said, they would have been in 6 of the last 8 college football playoffs if there had been 12 teams. But at this year, with high expectations, enter the season at plus 500 to win the Big Ten, minus 140 to make the playoff. So one of the favorites to make the playoff, and 22-1 to win it all. That's tied for the 9th best odds. So entering the season, probably expect Penn State to be ranked either 9th or 10th in the country, most likely. But when you look at the offensive side of the ball headed into this year for this 2024 season, talked about it earlier, but explosive plays is where the offense's improvement needs to be the biggest. Ranked 97th in the country last year in explosive plays. Those are plays over 20-plus yards. So they make a change at the offensive coordinator spot. They go out and they bring in the Kansas offensive coordinator, lure him away from the Big 12, and Andy Konalicki, I believe is how you say his last name, but bringing in the new OC from Kansas. Kansas had 76 explosive plays last year, which are plays, like I said, of 20 or more yards. That was 17th in the country, but no secret, though, the pressure is going to be on Drew Eller to make the next step at the quarterback spot. Former number 1 overall quarterback prospect in his recruiting class, was hyped up to kind of be one of these next phenoms. Didn't really stand out that much last year. He played well against, the inferior teams, but then against the better teams, he kind of struggled. And that's where Penn State has struggled. They kind of expected Drew Aller to be the guy to come in there and make that next step, help them get over that hump, get to that next level. He's been really great at taking care of the ball, played limited time as a freshman, but he threw 0 picks, and he started all of last year and only threw 2 picks. So really good at taking care of the football. Like I said, the turnover margin was elite for Penn State last year, second in the country, plus 16. That's great. Those are all good things. But this is kind of how like C.J. Stroud started out his rookie year last year, where would make some really nice plays, but really took care of the ball, didn't turn it over. And then as the year went on, he started to trust himself, test himself a little bit more, test defenses a little more, turned it over a couple more times, but that did result in some bigger plays, some more explosive plays, and he led the Texans to the playoffs and a playoff win. So Drew Aller, I think that's kind of been the message beaten into his head this offseason. Don't be afraid to let it loose. We have a really, really good defense behind you that we'll get into in a little bit, but don't be afraid to let it loose. Throw the ball into some more tight windows. We need some more explosive plays, and hopefully bringing in the new OC from Kansas helps, design some better plays to give Drew Aller and the playmakers on that team some more room to work with and give them some more explosive opportunities. But he needs to be more aggressive and assertive to help the Nittany Lions reach the next level. Here, Drew Aller's numbers in 2023 against top 25 teams. That was the 4 games. I believe it was against Iowa, the bowl game against Ole Miss, Michigan, and then Ohio State. They went 1-3 in those games, but only went 72 of 141 for 51.1% completion percentage there for Aller in those top 25 games. 722 yards, 5.1 yards per attempt, which was a very frightening number. 8 touchdowns, only 1 interception, 30 rushing yards, 88 yards, and 1 touchdown. So took really good care of the ball, but didn't really trust his arm, didn't really put the ball out there for his playmakers, and that was one of, if not his major red flag. Looking to help build off the passing game this year, from last year, and take it to another level this year. Wide receiver Julian Fleming was, I believe, the number 1 overall recruit coming out of high school from like Central PA, and he decided to go to Ohio State. Never really made much of a name for himself there, was more so of a role player behind guys like Marvin Harrison, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Mecca Ibuka. Julian Fleming never really was able to break out. He's coming home to Penn State, and he can be kind of the hero, the guy that has that magical season at receiver and really helps Aller take his step up in his game and become, the potential first-round pick that he was hyped up and talked about to be coming out of coming out of high school. They're hoping Julian Fleming is that piece to elevate the passing game. They're also going to be looking at Harrison Wallace III to step up too. And while a lot of pressure is going to be on Aller and the passing game to pick it up and be able to throw against some of these high-level teams, this offense returns 6 starters and has arguably one of the top 2 to 3 backfields in the country in the junior running backs with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Those guys combined to rush for a little over 1,600 yards and 14 touchdowns last year, and they enter their junior season ready to dominate. Katron Allen in his freshman and sophomore year, a little over 900 rushing yards. Singleton in his freshman year went over 1,000. Last year, only a little bit over 600. So he needs to regain that freshman year form, but those two guys can be as dynamic of a 1-2 punch at running back in all of college football. And Penn State, they've been really good over the years at turning out tight ends and producing some solid ones. Look at Khalil Dinkins. He's slotted to be the starting tight end this year. Look for him to have a solid year as well. But at the end of the day, this offense is really going to be determined, and the ceiling is going to be determined by whether Aller is able to flip that promise into production or not. When you look at the defensive side of the ball with this team, last year, Penn State's defense, along with Ohio State's and Michigan's, like as good as any group in the country. You put them up there with any of those top SEC squads, like in Alabama or Georgia. But they ranked last year. Penn State's defense ranked top 10 in scoring defense, rush defense, passing defense, and total defense. So all 4 major defensive categories, Penn State ranked in the top 10. Returned 6 starters on that side of the ball this year, but they do have a new defensive coordinator in Tom Allen, the former head coach at Indiana, a great defensive background, strong defensive pedigree. He is now the head coach at Indiana was the head coach at Indiana, now the DC at Penn State, as Manny Diaz left to be the head coach at Duke, their defensive coordinator from last year. But defense posted 3 shutouts last year. I don't care who you do it against. That's very impressive in college football. At the end of the day, they did it against Iowa, UMass, and Michigan State. Obviously not world beaters there, but anytime you're able to go out there, especially against 2 Big Ten teams, 2 Power 5 teams, and hold them to shutouts, I think that's an impressive mark. Abdul Carter headlines this defense, an outside backer, kind of edge rusher guy. He should be one of the best edge rushers in the sport. Was more like a middle kind of backer type. They moved him to the outside now, I think, and they're going to let him rush off the edge, I believe, in this 3-4 defense. Had 4.5 sacks in his sophomore year. He's a high-profile guy, though, that's expected to be a first-round pick next year, maybe even one of the first defenders off the board. Another high-profile edge rusher coming into this year, a guy expected to take another leap in his production is Dennis Sutton. He looks to have a big year 3 leap as well. Defensive line depth, from everything that I've been looking at, runs pretty deep. They've been recruiting really well in the trenches. They're going to need to show up, though, in what figures to be some really strong running games with Ohio State. And if they do wind up playing Michigan down the line as well. Only draw Ohio State in the regular season. But if they play Michigan, potentially in like a Big Ten title game, who knows, maybe even a college football playoff, you're going to be tasked with stopping the run there. And I know Michigan ran it all over them last year, despite Penn State having one of the better rush defenses in the entire country. So that's something that I think they're going to be focusing on, making sure they're tough and strong up front. Strong and deep secondary as well. Watch out for one of the newcomers here from the transfer portal, Georgia transfer cornerback CJ Harris. I think he could be one of the breakout guys from what I've been reading from this all season. But I'm interested to see this team and on the defensive side of the ball, the difference between Allen and Diaz. But this group has the pieces and the talent to be one of the top 10 groups in the country again. Schedule prediction for this Penn State team. I do think this squad makes a playoff. I think that minus 140, I don't know if I would bet that. I think there's still a little bit too much question mark with Aller in the offense. I mean, with some new teams there in the Big Ten that could potentially cause some trouble for them. But I do think 10-2 would get them in. I probably wouldn't bet it at minus 140. I just don't really think much great value there. But I'm going to have them losing at Wisconsin and to Ohio State. That's back-to-back games. I'm expecting Wisconsin to be a bit of a surprise team this year and take a step up. And going to Wisconsin has never been easy. I expect year 2 under Fickle. We'll talk about them in another episode. But I expect them to take a leap and be better. It could be kind of a statement win for them. And then Ohio State, they're my number 1 team in the country going into the season. I think it's going to be a really hard task. Penn State lucky enough to get them at home. If they are able to win that game, good for them. They're going to be going crazy in Happy Valley, but I think that's a game that they lose as well. And those are back-to-back games, so that could be real kind of season deflator. Interested to see it if they do lose those games back-to-back, if they're able to kind of rebound the rest of the way. But should be good enough to make the playoff. Like I said, that's at minus 140. If you like anything else with this Penn State team, they're plus 500 to win the Big Ten, and 22-1 to win it all. But that's the first episode here for our primer, our college episode previews. We're going to be going probably over the next month and a half, 25 to 30 teams, hitting on Georgia, Alabama. Going to do a Colorado episode, even throw them in there. Oklahoma, Texas. Oklahoma State's a team I want to talk on. Nebraska's a team I want to talk on. Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan. So not going to hit on every single school, every single big school, but I'm going to hit on, the major players, the teams that we're looking to make the playoffs, and then maybe a few teams that could have some breakthrough years or some teams that are going to be kind of a popular watch this year. So that'll do it for this episode of Beef Up Front as we get closer and closer to the college football season. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will talk soon.